Welcome back, everyone. In this episode, I'll talk more about some NPCs in Baldur's Gate 3 and how they affect the story. Due to not having a huge amount of the story for some of these NPCs, I just decided to put them all in one episode. That's right, listeners, you read the title of this episode right. For those of you that are curious, this episode is all about some of our loved and hated Drow characters in Baldur's Gate 3. Araj Ablordra. For those that missed her in Act 2, she could be found next to the kitchen in Moonrise Towers. She will take some of your blood and make you a potion based off your race and take what's left over for herself and use how she feels later on. You won't get to see what becomes of your leftover blood until you get to Act 3 and you find her in her home. For those of you who don't plan on romancing Astarion or have yet to do so, the reason most do not like her is because when you're romancing him, it is important that you let him make his own choice on biting her. Since she was a little kid, she basically had a kink of feeling a vampire biting and drinking her blood. So much that when she sees you with Astarion, she begs him to do so and gets a little pissy when he says no and you don't help him. She offers a very valuable potion if you make him bite her though. The Potion of Everlasting Vigor. It permanently increases the drinker's strength score by 2 when consumed. A little fun fact is the description of the potion. It reads, a reward received from biting Araj Ablordra. Vampirism has sometimes been called the Dark Gift or the Dark Kiss, perhaps as an allusion to their forbidden relationship to the sunrise. It does provide gifts of abundance, such is the case with this potion." End quote. So yeah, you basically get the strength of a vampire if you let him bite her. So let's get into her backstory. To be honest though, I have and always will love Drow lore the most. I can't explain it, but when I first started playing D&D, my father actually had me play a Drow as my first character. And when I was younger, I didn't quite like it because I read the old 2nd edition of Drow, which is all I had at the time, and it seemed like a terrible race, but as I grew older, I really loved the race more. He picked a good race for me to start my D&D adventures, and I'm glad he picked that for me, or things would have ended up differently. However, since 5th edition is a thing, Drows have changed over the many years. However, I shall play a Drow as if it was from the 2nd edition because it's fun. Anywho, fair warning to everybody, I will be butchering everyone's name in this episode. I apologize in advance. Okay, let's start by looking at House Ablordra. Carol Ordran was a matron mother of House Ablordra. Their house was in the Drow city of Menzoberranzan from 961 DR until the house's destruction in 1358 DR. Her house used its wild talents to ascend to the 3rd house of the Menzoberranzan by 1292 DR, obliterating many of the houses that stood in their way. Her skills in psionics kept the house secure and helped it rise. For those of you that don't know, Menzoberranzan, aka the City of Spiders, was a large underground Drow city-state in the Upper North Dark. Menzoberranzan was possibly the most well-known Drow city in Faerun. It was the home of Drizzt and many of his early adventurers. Now there were around 1,200 visitors roughly around the same time, which included beholders, deep dragons, illithids, Naga, and fiends. Because of the rare visitors that stayed in the city, a Drow house got a bit too curious for some of the rare beings, mainly the illithids. The reason I bring it up is because when you meet her with Astarion, he says how her blood smells bad, like there's something seriously wrong with her blood. Which is odd because if you play a Drow and romance him, he doesn't say anything about your blood, so you can rule out that Drows have different blood than others. If you do a bit of digging, or just let me do it all for you, you can find out that rumors flew around that House Ablordra sent its daughters away to train with, and even breed with, illithids. They were gifted with the rare art of psionics. So basically she has illithid blood running through her veins, as well as Drow blood, which explains why he doesn't like the smell of her blood. It does show that even having a tadpole in your head doesn't change your blood because you were not the product of illithid Drow breeding, like her bloodline was. It's not too clear as to how that all happened, but somehow it did, and it could be because they were more connected with the psionic powers than other Drow, or other races. So it could have helped in that fact, but House Ablordra is very secretive, and through many hours of research, I couldn't find anything more to share with you all. I'm sure I didn't dig very far, so if anyone finds anything, just let me know. So for this part of the episode, I would like to talk about Vicana Devere. She was once a priestess of Loth for many years. However, when it came to testing her faith, she was told to sacrifice an infant in the ritual to the Spider Queen, and she refused, and because of such, her and her house fell out of Loth's favor. House DeVere wanted back in the arms of the Spider Queen, and to do so, they needed to prostrate Vicania before the Spider Queen. However, Vicania was fed up with lost ways and believed she could survive without her. House DeVere was left vulnerable for the other house's attacks, and in desperation, Matron DeVere tried to sacrifice Vicania, but her wizard brother intervened and killed their mother. For this action, Loth turned him into a Drider. Vicania lost her clerical powers and fled to the surface. Sometime later, she found herself a new goddess, Shar. After being hunted by a band of elves and a band of goblins, Vicana was saved by a Kalshite caravan. Unfortunately, this was done only so she could end up being a pleasure slave for its rotund owner. She quickly bent him to her will and bade the caravan go wherever she wished. However, at night, his heart gave out, and the guards assumed Vicana had murdered him. She fled and thereafter seeked out a persecuted existence on the Sword Coast. Man, Drow women will never lose their dominance no matter how many centuries pass. During the Year of the Banner, 1368 DR, she was on the run from members of the Flaming Fist in the area of Peldavale. Later, she bought some land on the outskirts of Burgost, not with the intention of farming it, but simply a place to stay. She remained hooded at all times, even when conversing with her neighbor and awkward friend, Rowan Midfollow. During this time, Drow were still very, very hated among all surface races, and it was in their Drow's best interest to stay hidden for their safety. By the time she finally decided to remove her hood and reveal her heritage, it was too late. Rowan had already worked out that she was a Drow and concocted a plan of his own. He and his sons tortured her before burying her alive in a coffin. She escaped and killed Rowan and his sons, then burned down his farmhouse before fleeing south to Amd. In the century that passed since Baldur's Gate II, Vicana DeVere became the Mother Superior of the Shar Enclave in Baldur's Gate. She previously had a grander enclave in Waterdeep, but Lady Shar commanded her to raze it and kill all her loyal followers. Vicana's new mission was to take a child of Saloon and turn them over to Lady Shar. She and her group ambushed a Saloonite family that was in the process of a coming-of-age ritual of their half-elven girl, Genevieve Hollowleaf. Her parents were captured and imprisoned, while the girl was raised a cleric of Shar, under a new name, Shadowheart. Shadowheart always dreamed of becoming a Dark Justiciar, but Vicana thwarted any attempts at doing so. She tasked Shadowheart with retrieving the artifact that will help them against the Absolute. Interesting how she left one goddess because of the rituals the goddess wanted her to do, and ended up with another goddess to do basically the same thing as the other goddess. Interesting. Part 3, Minthara. Minthara received a tough and cruel upbringing. Born into the house Bainray of Menzoberranzan, she survived her first assassination attempt while a newborn, suckling on her mother's breast. Her mother protected the newborn and received a dagger wound while protecting her daughter. Minthara claimed that day she tasted her mother's blood mixed with milk. Years later, Minthara's own mother attempted to assassinate her and received a scar to match the one received while protecting the newborn Drow. She was raised as a noble, taught in the ways of Loth. She eventually rose to be an important house matron, enjoying all the luxuries of her birthright. Minthara's integration into the Absolute's fate through manipulation. The cult sent an envoy, 2 worshippers of the new deity. They arrived at Menzoberranzan preaching the Absolute's love. Of course, the emissaries were murdered and their corpses became a grotesque decoration. These cultists, however, did their job. Their audacity bothered Minthara greatly. She gathered a band of loyal fighters to pay the cult a visit. When she arrived at the Moonrise Towers, Minthara was greeted with praise and fanfare as a guest of honor instead of as an enemy. A feast followed, thrown in Minthara's honor, during which Orin the Red, one of the cult leaders, danced across the table, cutting the necks of Minthara's men open. The Drow woman was the only survivor favored by Orin, as the shapeshifter's new toy. She personally took Minthara into the tower cellars and held the Drow as the Absolute infected her with a mind-flared tadpole, making Minthara a true soul. Part 4. Nim and Soren Orith are Drow twins that now live in Shress Caress. Soren was originally employed as a courtesan, and Nim was an artisanal masseuse. The pair fled the Underdark due to the matriarch's mistreatment of men, ultimately coming to work in Baldur's Gate. Nim says that life is easy in her line of work and refers to Shress Caress as an oasis of calm within the chaos of Baldur's Gate. Soren seems to particularly enjoy his line of work, particularly fulfilling extreme and interesting fantasies. He remarks that Drow culture is obsessed with bondage, which became boring. Unlike the common Drow we see, they are not Loth-sworn Drow. They are Seldarin-sworn Drow. The difference between the two is Seldarin doesn't believe in the same rites and rituals and rulings as Loth-sworn Drow. They don't agree that men are lesser than women. Unfortunately, that's all I have on them. I couldn't find very much on them besides just that. Drow are very interesting in their own way, just like most races are as well. Like most races, they accept that they're not liked by most surface people, and that it takes a lot more time for them to get used to them. It's why we don't see as many Drow on the surface. They are comfortable where they are and how things are done in their homes. When playing a Drow in Baldur's Gate 3, you'll get a lot of comments how people don't see many Drow on the surface and how they are untrustworthy, which is good reason. Drow make good rogues and are good liars. Well, that's all I have for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Sorry I butchered a lot of the Drows' names and their locations. I tried my best. Sorry there wasn't a whole lot to talk about in this episode, but as I said, it was a Drow episode, and we don't really have a whole lot of Drows to talk about in this game. But pretty interesting stuff if you kind of look for it. Alright guys, I hope you all enjoy, and thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned!